Louisiana is filled with places that feel older than the maps drawn over them. Hidden mounds rise from quiet fields, strange trails cut through forgotten swamps, and ancient stories still cling to the bay. Some of these sites hint at lost cultures, others at unexplained events, but all of them leave you wondering how much of the past is still buried under the Louisiana heat. Watson Breek Mounds. When you first walk into the woods near the Ubachita River and see the Watson Breek Mounds, the place doesn't greet you with grand shapes or perfect lines. It feels quiet, almost too quiet for something this old. The earth rises in soft curves, shaped by hands that lived more than 5,000 years ago. They left no written notes, no story carved into stone, just these long, low mounds arranged in a giant oval that once meant something important to the people who built them. You stand there looking at this ring of earth and you realize how strange it is that something older than the pyramids can sit in the Louisiana woods without most people even knowing it exists. The layout pulls you in before you even understand what you're looking at. 11 mounds connected by ridges forming a shape that feels too neat to be random. You can almost picture groups of people hundreds of generations ago walking along these paths, carrying baskets of dirt to shape the earth for reasons we still don't fully grasp. And that's the mystery that makes this place feel alive. These were not farmers building temples for kings. They were hunter-gatherers, people who moved with the seasons. Yet here they were, creating a massive earthwork that would have taken decades of teamwork. Why do that unless the place held meaning deeper than daily survival? Standing on one of the ridges, you start thinking about what this land might have looked like back then. The river probably ran wider. The forest would have been wilder. The night sky, untouched by any glow, would have stretched over them like a perfect dome. Maybe the people who lived here watched the skies for signals. Maybe the oval shape helped them keep track of the seasons, the rising water, or the migration of animals. There's a calm rhythm to the design, the kind of balance that doesn't happen by accident. You can feel it even now, as if the ground still remembers what it was meant to do. What surprises most visitors is the age, 5,000 years. That number hits you hard when you're standing there. It's older than the earliest known pottery in the region, older than major cities anywhere in the Americas, and most surprising of all, older than the famous Poverty Point site, which means large-scale earth building didn't start with farmers. It began with people who spent much of their time hunting and gathering. These mounds challenge the old idea that big projects only come from settled, organized societies. Whoever lived here clearly had the ability to plan long-term, to work together, and to return season after season to finish something that would outlive them. You start wondering why this exact spot mattered. Maybe the river gave them everything they needed: food, water, clay, and a natural highway. Maybe the shape of the land made it feel special long before they shaped it. Some archaeologists think the people came here during certain times of the year, gathering in groups to socialize, trade, or take part in ceremonies. When you walk along the ridge, you can almost imagine the sound of voices rising from the oval, fires glowing at night, children running along the earthworks, and elders telling stories about the land. Even though the mounds look simple today, they once carried the weight of community. One thing that stands out about Watson Breek is how human it feels. There's no grand myth of gold, no legend of lost cities, no carvings of gods. It's just earth, lifted and shaped by hands. But sometimes the simple things are the ones that make you stop and think. These people didn't build for show, they built for meaning. You feel that in the quiet. No one knows what each mound was used for. Some might have held houses or small platforms. Some may have been gathering areas. The pattern of the oval could have lined up with the sun in different seasons, but even that isn't fully understood. The mystery isn't solved by one theory. It hangs in the air and stays with you. As you walk deeper into the site, you notice how the mounds sit low, as if they were shaped to blend into the land rather than rise above it. Many ancient sites try to reach the sky, but Watson Breek seems to sink into the world. It feels rooted, grounded, like it belongs to the land itself, and maybe that's part of the message the builders wanted to leave behind. They weren't trying to imitate mountains or build towers. They were shaping the earth into a cycle, an endless loop of ridges and mounds that echo the turning of seasons. When you look at the oval from above, it almost seems to breathe, as if each mound is part of a larger heartbeat. There's also a strange sense that this place almost disappeared. For thousands of years, the mounds sat hidden by vegetation and time. The forest slowly reclaimed the earthworks. Local people knew about the strange rises in the land, but no one knew how old they really were. It wasn't until the late 20th century that the true age and importance came to light. That realization changed how we see early people in North America. They were not simple wanderers. They were thinkers, builders, planners. They understood community well enough to work on a project that none of them would see fully completed. That kind of patience is rare, even today. If you stand in the center of the oval at sunset, the place takes on a different feel. The long shadows stretch across the ridges and create shapes that play tricks on your eyes. For a moment, you can feel the weight of time pressing around you. It's quiet enough that you can hear your own breathing. And in that moment, you get a sense of connection to the people who once stood where you're standing. They didn't leave a written record, but they left this shape. Something in them believed this was the right way to arrange the earth. Something guided their hands. That thought stays with you even after you leave. Most people expect ancient mysteries to come with legends of spirits or curses, but Watson Brake's mystery is different. It's softer, calmer, but in some ways even more powerful. It makes you question what we assume about the past. Why did people who moved with the seasons invest so much time here? Why this shape? Why an oval, not a circle or a line? And why did the tradition end? After centuries of work, the site was abandoned. Life moved on. Floods changed the land. New groups came and went, and the mounds slowly melted into the landscape until curiosity brought them back into the spotlight. Visiting today feels a bit like stepping between worlds. The woods are quiet, the air thick, and the ground damp beneath your shoes. It's peaceful, but it also carries a weight. You know you're standing in a place that held meaning long before modern roads or towns existed. There's a sense of respect that comes naturally. You don't need signs or stories. The land explains itself. You feel the connection in the shape of the ground. The site isn't a major tourist spot. There's no big visitor center or dramatic walkway, and maybe that's for the best. Its quiet nature helps you sense the mystery without distraction. The mosquitoes can be bad, the trails can feel muddy, and the weather can shift fast. But that's part of the experience. It's a reminder that this land shaped the people as much as the people shaped it. When you finally step away, you carry the thought that something this old still holds power, not in a dramatic way, but in a steady, gentle way that echoes across time. Watson Brake doesn't shout its mystery, it whispers it, and that whisper stays with you long after you leave. The Salt Dome Caverns of Avery Island. When you step onto Avery Island, the first thing you notice is how different it feels from the rest of the Louisiana landscape. The Salt Dome sits like a quiet giant under your feet, lifting the land just enough to make it feel slightly out of place in a region known for swamps and open marsh. Most people come here thinking only about the famous hot sauce made on the surface, but the real mystery lies deep below in the hidden caverns carved into the salt itself. You don't see them from the road. You don't feel them when you walk. But knowing they're down there changes the way you look at the island. There's something strange about standing on top of a solid mountain of salt, while the rest of the state sits barely above sea level. As you move through the trees, it's easy to forget what lies underneath. The island is covered with thick vegetation, broad oaks, and that humid stillness that Louisiana seems to breathe out of the ground. But then you remember that the earth here rises more than 200 feet above the surrounding marsh, because the salt dome is pushing everything upward. That upward push is what created the caverns in the first place. Over thousands of years, pressure, water, and movement carved strange spaces deep inside the salt. Some are small pockets, some might be long tunnels. No one knows every detail because much of the dome remains unexplored. That's part of what makes it such an intriguing mystery. Salt domes form when massive layers of ancient salt, buried deep under rock and sediment, begin to rise like slow-motion bubbles. They push up through the earth at a pace too slow for human eyes to see. When one reaches near the surface, it creates a dome. That's what happened here. Imagine watching the land lift over ages until a solid salt core created an island in the middle of the marsh. Now imagine that inside this core are hollow spaces shaped by time, water flow, and natural shifts. These caverns aren't open to the public and have rarely been mapped. Some early explorers described them as long, echoing chambers where sound carried in odd ways. Others said they felt disoriented inside, as if the walls swallowed light. Standing on the surface, you can't help but wonder what it feels like to be inside one of those caverns. The thought alone gives you that mix of curiosity and unease. Salt is solid, but it can also shift. It flows very slowly, like a heavy liquid under pressure. That means the caverns inside the dome might not stay the same shape over time. Some could collapse, some could open new channels. When you think about that movement happening deep below you, the ground feels less steady than it appears. What makes Avery Island even more interesting is its long human history. Native peoples visited this place for thousands of years because the salt was precious. Salt meant food could be preserved, meat could be stored, and life could be sustained. They carved out the surface layers to gather salt long before Europeans arrived. But even they didn't fully understand what lay beneath. They knew the land felt different. They knew the salt came from deep places. Beyond that, the mysteries stayed underground. You start to picture ancient people digging into the salt, while deep caverns echoed below their feet. Maybe they heard distant sounds from the shifting dome. Maybe those sounds became part of the stories they passed down. It's easy to imagine them gathering near fires at night, speaking about the strange heart of the island. They lived close to the land, and they would have noticed things most modern visitors miss. Small tremors, odd acoustics, the way certain spots felt colder or warmer for no clear reason. As time went on, settlers arrived and began mining salt more aggressively. Some miners claimed they heard hollow noises underground as they worked. Others said they felt air drafts from cracks that shouldn't have been there. These small details fed into local stories about hidden chambers and underground spaces large enough to walk through. A few explorers tried to map parts of the caverns, but the conditions were rough. Salt dust filled the air, the walls glistened with moisture, the ground sometimes shifted underfoot. And the deeper they went, the more confusing the layout became. Walking across the island today, you wouldn't think any of that is still happening beneath you. The place feels calm. Birds call from the trees. The bayous reflect the sky, but that calmness hides the truth that the salt dome is always changing. It expands, contracts, and reshapes itself slowly over time. That movement might open new caverns, or seal old ones. No one can predict exactly what happens down there, and that uncertainty gives the site an edge of quiet tension. There's also something eerie about knowing that the surface of the island is thin in certain places. You could be walking over a pocket of hollow space without even realizing it. The ground doesn't show signs. It looks solid, but the dome is like a living thing, full of hidden chambers that shift without warning. That's not to say the island is unsafe. People live and work here, but the idea stays in your mind once you hear it. In the late afternoon, the air grows heavier, and the whole island seems to slow down. The shadows from the trees stretch out across the ground, and the heat settles in your bones. You look across the landscape and imagine the dome beneath you, stretching deeper and deeper into the earth. The thought of those caverns, dark, silent, untouched, sits quietly in the back of your mind. You wonder what it feels like inside, what the air smells like, whether sound echoes in strange patterns. It's the kind of curiosity that makes you want to explore, even though you know you probably never will. Today, Avery Island is best known for its factory, gardens, and wildlife. Visitors come for the scenery, not the geology. But if you take the time to think about what lies beneath, the island transforms from a simple tourist spot into one of Louisiana's oldest natural mysteries. The salt dome is the reason the island exists. The caverns inside it are the reason the mystery remains. If you stand at a quiet spot and listen, the island almost feels like it's breathing. The wind moves through the leaves, the water nearby shifts in slow waves, and somewhere far beneath, the salt dome continues its slow, ancient movement. You'll never hear it, but knowing it's there is enough to change the atmosphere. It makes you feel small in the best way, like you're standing on top of a story written over millions of years. The present-day experience adds a strange contrast. The top of the island is full of life, color, and noise, but the deeper levels are untouched darkness. No lights, no paths, no signs, just hidden rooms shaped by nature itself. When you leave the island, that contrast stays with you. You've stood on top of something old, powerful, and mysterious without ever seeing it directly. That's the quiet pull of the salt dome caverns of Avery Island. The mystery isn't loud, it's not dramatic, it lives in the unseen, and somehow, that makes it even stronger. The Prehistoric Canebrake Trail Networks. If you've ever walked through a thick Louisiana canebrake, you know how the world seems to close in around you. The cane rises taller than your head, packed tight like living walls. Light filters through in thin streaks, and every step sounds louder than it should. Now imagine trying to move through that kind of maze without a clear path. It would be almost impossible. That's why the ancient trail networks hidden inside these canebrakes matter so much. They weren't just shortcuts. They were the highways of a world that no longer exists. When you picture ancient Louisiana, it's easy to think of open rivers, wide marshes, and tall forests. But much of the land was once covered in dense cane thickets, growing so thick that even sunlight had to push its way through. Early native peoples learned how to read these canebrakes the way we read road maps. They knew where the ground dipped, where the cane grew thinner, and where natural openings appeared. Over generations, they carved pathways so precise and so heavily used that they became part of the landscape itself. Walking one of these old routes today, you probably wouldn't know it was once an ancient trail unless someone pointed it out. They don't look like modern paths. Some are barely wider than your shoulders. Others curve sharply, following the natural layout of the land instead of cutting through it. These trails weren't built with tools the way we think of construction. They were shaped by repeated footsteps, patterned movement, and the steady push of travelers who knew exactly where they were going. You can almost imagine the sounds of those early journeys, soft feet moving through the cane, the snap of dry stems, voices speaking quietly so the sound didn't travel far. These networks weren't just for daily use. They connected villages, hunting grounds, mound sites, and seasonal gathering places. They carried goods, stories, and traditions from one group to another. In many ways, the trails were the lifelines of ancient Louisiana, stretching across distances that would feel overwhelming without a guide. One thing that stands out when you think about the Canebrake networks is how clever they were. The people who built and used them understood the land deeply. They knew where flooding would cut off a route. They knew which spots stayed dry even during heavy rains. They knew which trails worked best in summer and which ones made more sense in winter. The networks weren't random. They were flexible, practical, and shaped by generations of experience. As you walk through a modern canebrake, the air feels thick and warm, almost heavy on your skin. The cane rustles like whispering voices. You feel closed in, even when you know the world outside is just a few steps away. It gives you a sense of how challenging travel must have been without trails. The old paths didn't just make movement easier, they made it possible. You can picture families moving together, hunters carrying game, traders bringing goods like salt, shell beads, and stone tools from distant places. Each trail tells a story of people who lived close to the rhythm of the land. In some places, the trails were more than simple paths. They were shaped by knowledge that's been lost over time. Some followed ridges of slightly higher ground. Others hugged the edges of waterways, hidden by the thick cane but close enough to offer quick access to boats. A few ran straight toward mound centers, suggesting a pattern of planned movement rather than pure convenience. When you stand at one of these mounds today and look out across the landscape, it's easy to imagine invisible lines stretching through the cane, linking different communities like strands in a web. If you listen closely in a quiet section of cane, you start to understand how these networks survived. The cane itself responds to movement. Paths stay open when people use them. When they stop, the cane grows back, closing the world again. That's why many of the ancient trails are faint or hidden today. They were alive in a way. They depended on humans to keep them clear. And when the original communities left or changed their travel habits, the cane simply took the land back. There's something eerie and beautiful about that. The trails weren't permanent in the usual sense. They existed because people existed in that specific rhythm. When the rhythm ended, the paths faded like footsteps in mud after rain. Yet traces still show up, slight depressions in the ground, subtle lines in satellite images, or places where the cane grows differently. Archaeologists can sometimes detect them by studying soil patterns or changes in vegetation, but many remain mysteries hidden beneath the thick green canopy. The more you think about these ancient trail systems, the easier it is to understand why they were so essential. Louisiana's landscape can be harsh. Floods come without warning. Mosquitoes swarm. Heat presses down. Without clear trails, moving through the canebrakes would be physically exhausting and risky. But with them, the land turns into a connected web of safe routes. Each trail offered its own advantages. Some provided quick access to fishing spots. Others led to natural high grounds used during storm seasons. And some connected major cultural sites. Imagine traveling at dawn. The air is cool, and the sky is just beginning to brighten. You step into the canebrake, and the path opens naturally in front of you. You can't see far ahead, but you trust the route because generations before you walked it. You follow the curves, listening to the soft rustle of cane brushing your shoulders. You know exactly where you'll emerge, somewhere familiar, somewhere important. That feeling still lingers when you walk these areas today. Even when the path is overgrown, you sense a pattern beneath your feet. The ground feels slightly smoother or firmer. The cane grows in a way that hints at past movement. It's subtle, but it pulls at your imagination. You start to picture the people who walked here long before roads, cars, or even horses shaped travel. Their world was quieter, but more connected in ways we often overlook. As you move along, you notice how life gathers around the trails. Birds perch on the edges. Small animals scurry through openings. Even the light seems to find its way in more easily. The trails weren't only for humans, they became natural corridors for all kinds of wildlife. In that sense, the networks became part of the ecosystem. Everything moved more easily through these spaces. The land adapted to the pattern, and the pattern adapted to the land. In the present day, the Canebrake networks are harder to trace, but they still matter. Some modern roads follow the same lines. Some hiking paths or hunting routes unknowingly sit on ancient footsteps. The hidden structure of the landscape still remembers. Even when the cane grows tall and thick, there's a quiet memory in the ground. By the time you step out of a canebrake and into open space, the world feels different. You breathe easier, the sun feels brighter, and you carry with you the sense of what it must have been like to navigate these trails when the land was wilder and every journey depended on knowing the right path. These networks may be covered or forgotten in places, but the mystery remains woven into the land, waiting for anyone patient enough to notice. Bayou Teche Mound sites. When you follow the curve of Bayou Teche, the water moves with a slow, steady pace that feels older than anything built around it. The bayou bends like a long S-shaped ribbon, and along its edges sit the remains of ancient mounds that most people drive past without ever realizing they exist. The Bayou Teche Mound sites aren't dramatic at first glance. They rise in gentle slopes, softened by grass and time. But the truth is, they belong to a story that reaches back thousands of years, a story that feels hidden in the quiet of Louisiana's swampland. As you walk near one of the mounds, the first thing you notice is how the land isn't flat the way you expect southern Louisiana to be. There are high spots where the ground seems to lift almost on instinct, like the earth itself wanted to rise. These are the places where ancient people built homes, gathered, and buried their dead long before towns, roads, or even written history. When you stand on top of one of the mounds and look around, the view almost makes sense of everything. You can see far enough to imagine what this land looked like before levees and power lines. You can picture boats moving along the bayou, people calling across the water, and fires burning at night as families settled into their daily routines. The real mystery is how much we don't know about who built these mounds. Some were created thousands of years ago, during a time when small groups of people moved with the seasons. Others may have been built later by different groups who added their own layers of soil, shell, or clay. When you dig into the soil figuratively, not literally, you're digging into a timeline that stretches far beyond familiar history. The people who lived here never wrote anything for us to read, so the land becomes the only storyteller. One thing that makes Bayou Teche feel different from other ancient mound sites is its mix of cultures. The bayou itself was once the main channel of the Mississippi River, long before it shifted course. That means people passed through here for thousands of years, carrying traditions, tools, and stories from distant places. The mounds reflect that movement. Some show signs of early hunter-gatherer life. Others suggest use as village platforms or ceremonial spots. When you stand beside one of the larger mounds, you can almost sense the layers of history stacked beneath your feet. There's a quiet energy to these sites, especially early in the morning when the fog hangs low over the bayou. The air feels heavy with moisture, and sounds travel farther than you expect. A bird call echoes across the water. Something moves in the brush. The bayou itself makes soft, slow noises that seem to answer back. In moments like that, you can almost imagine what life sounded like here 1,000 years ago. The people who built these mounds lived close to the land. They understood the rise and fall of the water. They watched storms come in long before they appeared on the horizon. They knew when fish would be running and when game would move through the trees. Everything they did was tied to this place. Something that always stands out when you visit a mound along Bayou Teche is how practical the builders were. These aren't fancy earthworks shaped into perfect patterns. They were made to lift people above floods, to provide stable ground for homes or gatherings, and sometimes to honor the dead. The builders weren't trying to impress anyone. They were trying to make life possible in a land that can change overnight. In that way, the mounds are a reminder of resilience. They show how people adapted to the environment instead of trying to fight it. But that doesn't mean the mounds have no deeper meaning. Some include layers of packed earth that would have taken a lot of work to build. Others appear in clusters, arranged in ways that hint at planning rather than simple necessity. You get the feeling that some spots were chosen not only because they were high ground, but because they meant something to the people who chose them. Maybe they used them for gatherings, rituals, or seasonal meetings. Maybe they carried stories that no one remembers now. That loss of memory adds to the mystery. The land holds the shape, but the meaning has faded. Walking along Bayou Teche, you might notice how the water reflects the sky in a way that makes everything look twice as wide. The trees lean toward the water. Spanish moss drifts in the breeze. A quiet stillness settles over the place, the kind that makes you slow down without even trying. You start to understand why people built here. The bayou wasn't just food and water. It was a path, a guide, a steady companion through the seasons. It shaped the people as much as they shaped the mounds. One of the interesting things about these sites is how many remain unstudied. Some are tucked behind private property. Others sit hidden under layers of vegetation. A few have been worn down by weather or farming. The ones that remain untouched hold secrets that might never be uncovered. When you see a mound covered in trees and brush, you can't help but wonder what lies beneath. Did someone once live here? Was this a gathering place, a burial mound, or simply a high spot that changed over time as different groups passed through? There's something humbling about knowing that these questions might never be answered. Modern life moves fast. Most people speeding down the road don't realize they're passing structures older than the history they learned in school. These mounds sit quietly, letting the world move around them. They don't call attention to themselves. They don't demand it. They're like old memories buried under the surface, waiting for someone patient enough to listen. In the late afternoon, when the sun hangs low and the shadows stretch across the water, the bayou takes on a warm glow that makes the mounds look almost golden. The light hits the water, the grass moves in slow waves, and the whole scene feels frozen in time. You can stand there and feel the past pressing close, not in a dramatic way, but in a steady, quiet way. It's the kind of moment that reminds you why people keep coming back to places like this. There's something grounding about standing on land shaped by hands long gone. The present-day setting adds another layer to the mystery. Some mounds sit near homes or farms. Some hide in empty fields. A few are marked, but many aren't. Weather can be unpredictable, with sudden rain that floods low ground. Mosquitoes can be unbearable in summer. The air stays thick most of the year, but these challenges make the mounds feel even more connected to their original builders. They dealt with the same heat, the same storms, the same shifting landscape. In a strange way, standing there reminds you how little the land has changed at its core. Even after you leave, the place sticks with you. Maybe it's the curve of the bayou, or the quiet way the mounds rest in the grass. Maybe it's knowing that people lived here long before recorded history, shaping the land with nothing but patience, teamwork, and belief. You carry that feeling with you afterward, the sense that you witnessed something old and important without fully understanding it. And maybe that's enough. The Bayou Teche mound sites don't scream their mystery, they let you discover it at your own pace.